Lift every voice and sing till earth and
Hi everyone. Today we're going to be framing the purpose of our history course. The directions are as follows. Read and annotate the following articles. You can do this in your Google Doc. In the end, we will discuss how this article supports or challenges your ideas about the study of history. Article 1. Why students should study history. This article is taken from an interview with Howard Zinn. He was interviewed in 1994 by Barbara Miner of Rethinking Schools magazine. Howard Zinn is a world-renowned professor of history and author of the book, A People's History of the United States. I started studying history with one view in mind, to look for answers to the issues and problems I saw in the world about me. By the time I went to college, I had worked in a shipyard, had been in the Air Force, had been in a war. I came to history asking questions about war and peace, about wealth and poverty, about racial division. Sure, there's a certain interest in inspecting the past, and it can be fun, sort of like a detective story. I can make an argument for its knowledge, for its own sake, as something that can add to your life. But while that's good, it is small when compared to the very large goal of trying to understand and do something about the issues that face us in the world today. We should be encouraged to go into history in order to come out of it clearer and stronger in our own understanding of the world around us. Interviewer: What do you see as some of the major problems in how U.S. history has been taught in this country? Another major problem has been the emphasis in teaching American history through the eyes of important and powerful people, through the presidents, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the generals, the industrialists. Interviewer: How do you prevent history lessons from becoming a memorization of dates and battles and congresspersons and presidents? You can take any incident in American history and enrich it and find connections with today. You should ask students if anything in a particular historical event reminds them of something they read or see in their communities or the world today. When you press students to make connections, to generalize from the uniqueness of a particular historical event and find something it has in common with another event, then history becomes alive and not just past, but present. And most importantly, you must raise the controversial and important questions. For example, when studying the Mexican-American War, ask students, was it right for us to take Mexican territory? Should we be proud of that? Should we celebrate that? History classes often think they must avoid judgments of right and wrong because, after all, those are matters of personal opinions. Those are issues on which people will disagree. But it's the areas of disagreement that are the most important. Questions of right and wrong and justice are exactly the questions that should be raised all the time. When students are asked, is this right? Is this wrong? Then it becomes interesting. Then they can have a debate, especially if they learn that there's no simple, absolute, agreed upon universal answer. It's not like giving them a multiple choice question where they are right or wrong. History classes must also address the problem that people have been miseducated to become dependent on government, to think that their most important act as a citizen in democracy is to go to the polls and vote every 2 years or 4 years. That's where the history of social movements comes in. History classes should dive into colonial rebellions, into the abolitionist movement, into the populist movement, into the labor and union movement, and so on, and make sure that these social movements don't get lost in the overall story of presidents and Congresses and Supreme Courts. Emphasizing social and protest movements in the making of history gives students an understanding that they, as a people in the country, are the most important actors in history. Interviewer: Are there specific ways that history classes can foster an anti-racist perspective? In many classrooms, this moral goal of being anti-racist is not considered in teaching history. For example, I think people have to be given the facts of slavery, the facts of racial segregation, the facts of government complicity. Complicity means supporting or allowing by not stopping something to happen. In racial segregation, government complicity in racial segregation, the facts of the fight for equality. But that is not enough. I think students need to be engaged emotionally on the issue of equality. They have to try to feel what it was like to be a slave, to be jammed into slave ships, to be separated from your family. Novels, poems, autobiographies, memoirs, the reminiscences of ex-slaves, the letters that slaves wrote, the writings of Frederick Douglass. I think they have to be introduced as much as possible. Students should learn the words of people themselves, to feel their anger, their rage. Interviewer: Is it possible for history to be objective? Objective means describing something in a completely unbiased or neutral way. Objectivity is neither possible nor desirable. It is not possible because all history is subjective. All history represents a point of view. History is always a selection from an infinite number of facts, and everybody makes the selection differently based on their values and what they think is important. Since it's not possible to be objective, you should be honest about that. Objectivity is not desirable because if we want to have an effect on the world, we need to emphasize those things which will make students more active citizens and more moral people. Article 2 is entitled "The Biggest Lie We Teach About American History." The article is taken from an interview with James Loewen. He was interviewed in 2018 by Sean Illing of Vox Media. James Loewen wrote an award-winning book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, and taught race relations at the University of Vermont for over 20 years. One of my favorite writers, Gore Vidal, once described his country as the United States of amnesia. We learn nothing because we remember nothing, he wrote. Vidal's point is simple enough. America's concept of itself is shaped by mythology, not by facts. And it's harder to address mistakes if you're unwilling to face them honestly. Interviewer: According to your book, the biggest lie we are taught in U.S. history class is that the country started out great, and we've just been getting better ever since. It is true that progress has been made since the country began in 1776. My problem is the suggestion that progress is automatic, which it most certainly isn't. Second, the idea we're always getting better keeps us from seeing those times when we are getting worse. Consider the period of 1890 to 1940, when race relations got systematically worse every year. America actually got more racist in its ideology than at any other time in history. After slavery, white people convinced themselves that there were equal opportunities, which is a lie. They told themselves that black people were criminals and incompetent and unable to succeed. The point isn't that life was better for people under slavery. It's that the story of moral and political progress isn't so clear. And when we pretend that it is neat and clear, we cause teachers to teach and students to think that progress happens automatically, and that destroys the impulse to change things, to become an activist. Interviewer: What do you mean when you say that some history textbooks don't focus on the right things? That gets back to the point about progress. I think that textbooks fail to teach what causes what. Everything is just one damn thing after another. You need to learn all those little facts. Therefore, they fail to impart the idea that we, as a people, should be trying to achieve things that won't happen without our efforts. For example, if we want to make our society less racist, there are certain things we'll have to do, like we did between 1954 and 1974. During this time, you could actually see our society become less racist, in both attitudes and in terms of our social structures. If we want to make society more racist, then we can do some things we did between 1890 and 1940, because we can actually see our society becoming more racist, both in practices and in attitudes. So by not teaching causation, we disempower people from doing anything. By teaching the things that things are pretty much good and getting better automatically, we remove the reason for citizens to be citizens, to exercise the powers of citizenship. But people exercising their powers of citizenship is exactly how progress happens. Nothing good happens without the collective efforts of dedicated people. History, the way it's commonly taught, has a way of blurring this fact and making it more difficult to see the work of all the many collective people who made this happen.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let all rejoice.